It is a pleasure to be here with you this morning on this beautiful San Diego day to talk about my friend Keith Russell, a fellow Toastmaster and a person who exemplified caring. I'll reflect on three areas of Keith and Keith's life. The first is 30 years here at Hardhats. Keith was committed to Hardhats Club 1394. Second area will be how Keith cared about animals. And I have a little story about that. And the third is how Keith used his motivational skills that he learned here and worked on here at Hardhats in life. So I'll talk to you about those three areas. Keith, like me, joined Hardhats because he saw an opportunity to improve his public speaking and communication skills. We were both in sales. Keith sold homes and I sold theories to juries. Keith was a student of motivational speaker Tony Robbins. In one of his speeches, he told the club how he walked upon hot coals. He used techniques from Tony Robbins and used his rich and smooth voice as he described the glowing coals and how he felt no pain whatsoever. And he took the club with him on this mystical trip of 15 feet across burning hot fire. That was Keith's. And Keith, he used the techniques called neuro-linguistic programming, which is NLP. In his famous line, "You, like me, want to hear the real story." Or in sales presentations, he would say things like, "By now, you have made up your mind about this sale." This technique influences the behavior of the listener by using suggestive words and gestures to buy what Keith was selling. Keith Russell led this club by example. He fulfilled just about every leadership role in the club: president, secretary, sergeant at arms. And the sergeant at arms, for you that don't know, you got to get here real early and you're the last person to leave. And he did it with enthusiasm, with energy. It's like, "Keith, what are you doing? It's not 7 o'clock yet. You're scaring me." But that was Keith. He spoke at Hardhats on an array of topics: deep sea fishing in the deepest waters of Mexico, catching 100-pound tunas, and how he went on about these stories, these long fish stories, obviously. He also talked about interesting topics like Deepak Chopra, who I had never heard of, and how Deepak Chopra was using spirituality to affect healing and health. So a lot of his speeches were amazingly interesting. As I spoke to you about before about neuro-linguistic programming, and this is basically what the way you say and the words you choose can affect the outcome of a conversation or a sale. By just saying things like, "Buy now, you've made up your mind." You basically told the person to buy now. So Keith used that, and he taught us about that. Most of all, his speeches exuded kindness and love. He cared about his fellow Toastmasters, but most of all, he cared about the continued success of Hardhats. Let me talk to you about the second area, which is his love of animals. Keith loved animals, especially his two cats, Thunder and Lightning. In fact, when Keith was courting his wife, Dorothy, he said to her, quote, "In order to love me, you will have to love my cats." And Dorothy said yes to both of those. Keith so loved those cats that I have a story that perfectly illustrates Keith's love for his cat, Lightning. The cat was 17 years old and looked as thin as a rake. Patches of fur rather than that nice fur that you see on a cat. It was frail and skinny. This cat, Lightning, resembled like a teddy bear that a kid had for years that went through the washing machine like one too many times. So Keith says to me, he says, I was his lawyer, and he asked me with the twinkle in his eye, that twinkle right there. That twinkle right there. He says, "Tom, can you represent me on this traffic ticket for blowing a stop sign?" I'm like, "Okay, Keith, sure." So we went to court. The judge was very local. She said, "Let me make one thing clear in my courtroom. There is no such thing. It will not be accepted to say guilty with an explanation." Well, of course, Keith's case is called, and he's standing by my side, and I say, guilty with an explanation. The judge, she was not happy. She snarled, what's the explanation? I explained Lightning, the aged cat, was sick and shaking from some ailment that Keith and had to act as the cat's ambulance driver and get Lightning to the vet as soon as possible. That my client made sure that there were no cars in the intersection and that he glided through that stop sign to get to the vet on time, safely. In what I perceived from the judge to be a harsh tone, she said, Mr. Luneau, approach this bench. I timidly walked forward. She leaned over and whispered, how's Lightning? I go, he made it. She goes, I go, he's safely at home. She said, case dismissed. And that is an example how much Keith cared about his cat that the judge understood it and dismissed his case. So here's item 3. Keith used his caring to motivate others. He did it at Hardhats and he did it in life. Bowling was Keith's sport. David Mezzacappa, right, Sarah, and all who knew Keith knew that he was a bowler and also knew that a night at the bowling alley with Keith was going to be fun. So I asked my son, Miles, he's 31 years old, preparing for the speech. I said, Miles, what do you remember about Keith? He said, Dad, I remember. This is 21 years ago. He says, I remember I was 12 years old. We're at the bowling alley, and Keith takes the time to teach me how to properly bowl. That's nice. He says, no, but that's not it. He says, he had me so motivated and so inspired. He was exuding all this energy. He says, I was like, I knew I was going to throw a strike. He says, I felt as though I was going to throw a strike every time. And then that bowling was my thing now because of Keith's energy and enthusiasm. He had the gift of encouragement coupled with the enthusiasm to motivate others. That was because Keith cared about people and wanted them to succeed. Keith, the caring man, cared most about his wife, Dorothy, the love of his life. Keith, Hardhats will forever miss you and your spirit, but we will never forget what you did for this club. Madam Toastmaster.